Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. If you're somebody that likes YouTube fitness information, you don't need to watch this introduction. Today, I'm sitting down with Mr. Vigorous Steve. Vigorous Steve is the man in YouTube fitness, PED, and bodybuilding information on the advanced level. His platform has brought so much information to the masses about PEDs, both commonly used but misunderstood, and stuff you've never heard of before. If for some reason you're watching me but you haven't heard of Steve, I'm about to open you up to a whole new world of information. This is one of my favorite interviews I've gotten to do because we get so many actionables that you can write down and implement into your training and PED protocols today. Not to mention, for those of you that I just mentioned that might not know who Steve is, you're about to get a complete paradigm shift in what you thought you knew about performance enhancement. Ladies and gentlemen, it was my honor to sit down with Vigorous Steve. Here's the interview. All right, everybody, welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. This is an episode that I've been looking forward to selfishly for a little while. And in a way, and I've said this before, it's just another example of the fact, I feel like I found the cheat code here. Just start a good podcast and you get to get all these consult calls with the smartest people in the industry. So if that's not a good segue. Exactly. If that's not a good segue into an introduction, I don't know what is. But you guys heard me in the beginning go over Vigorous Steve and who he is and what he's brought to the community. So now we're going to kind of deep dive into stuff. But before we get into protocols, suggestions, things you can do, things you might not have heard of, Steve, in your words, just give me kind of the brief rundown. What brought you to the table? What is it that you do, but what brought you there? What brought you to the level that you're at, and what do you like to go over with people?
I could start very early. When I was 15, I went to the gym, and then you try to learn, and you find that the information is lackluster, right? You read from the bodybuilding magazines, Muscle and Fitness, Muscular Development, and you try some stuff, but you don't realize that it's purely catered to people who take steroids. And then you buy a couple bodybuilding books, the Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that kind of stuff. And then slowly you start to piece it together. But I always felt that the information was lacking. So you go to the library to find a little bit more there about nutrition, about training. And then the internet comes around and you start to learn there. You go on the bulletin boards and the forums, and you actually get to speak to IFBB pros or people at the higher level. You try to learn more there. So after 25 years of that, and now leveraging, PubMed and Science Direct and even AI, it's just a continuous learning process. And now I felt the last couple of years that I'm in a position to give back. So I've been bodybuilding since I was 15 years old. You go through these phases where you're super big and a little bit smaller and, due to an injury or something like that. And I just keep presenting myself, whether I'm big or small. I never competed because I never felt that I had what it takes to be on stage. I coached a lot of competitive bodybuilders over my years, maybe 15 years that I coached competitive bodybuilding until, the C19 Florona hit, and then there wasn't really much competition going on. So I kind of retired and moved over to YouTube. And then I realized that I could educate so many more people through YouTube videos than I could, one-on-one coaching, because I usually cut it off at 50 clients, because otherwise it would be too much, too much people to really be involved with and teach them one-on-one. And now we're here. Now I have 150,000 subscribers and doing podcasts left and right. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, that's basically the Reader's Digest version.
And the information that you put out there is incredible. It's really second to none. And I'm not the type to sit here and blow smoke. So I'll make that statement confidently, because anybody that doesn't believe me can just go to your channel and just scan through the sheer volume of information that you have. I think the biggest service that you do to the community is bringing such a multitude of different approaches and different ways to go about all the things that we're trying to do. Because I found that we live in this crazy time. Like you said, we all have access to things like AI, chat GPT, whatever form of AI there is, even just searching through, examine.com and all these different ways to pull up all these published research studies, anecdotal reports, so on and so forth. But it takes a certain skill set to be able to really decipher these things. Just because we can look them all up doesn't mean that we can extrapolate the data from them in a way that can be beneficially utilized for what we're trying to do. And it's weird because we've got so much access to so much information these days, but people are still making the same stupid mistakes. People are still going back to the well that we've been going to for all these years. And I'm seeing the same abuse of trenbolone. I'm seeing the same misinformation about growth hormone. I'm seeing the same archaic information about insulin use. And there's just all this stuff that's still being done wrong, because we need access to information, or we need people like yourself to kind of break down all the options. Now, that's not to say watch all of Steve's videos and just buy all those PEDs and
don't do that. The videos are there in case you're interested. So let's say you're interested in compound XYZ, then it's very likely I have a deep dive on it where I review all of the scientific evidence and I try it myself, but also explain the drug interactions, which is something completely overlooked in our bodybuilding space and the fitness community in a whole. Like, we don't do one drug at a time. We don't take TRT and that's it, right? We take polypharmacy, TRT, or maybe multiple milligrams, hundreds of milligrams of testosterone, and then growth hormone on top, and an aromatase inhibitor, or primabol and ormastrone, and then 5 different fat burners, while you're trying to cut. But that all has synergy and drug interactions, which is poorly understood. And having coached many bodybuilders on stages where they were subject to drug testing, you get a little bit more nuanced when it comes to, the biomechanics and the biology and how these drugs metabolize and interfere with the metabolism or enhance the metabolism of other drugs. And that's what I try to bring to the table in these deep dives, so people understand, if I take Mirabegron, it inhibits this particular enzyme, which if they combine Mirabegron with a microdose LSD, it prevents the microdose of LSD from breaking down through the cytochrome P452 A6 or 7, A7, and then LSD is more potent. And it's the same with fluvoxamine. It inhibits a couple CYP3A4 enzymes, and now your steroids are more potent. But if you take modafinil, it enhances the metabolism of these steroids. So this is how you create a little bit better understanding on how these drugs interact with each other and how you should dose them. This may be a little bit higher, this is a little bit lower, and then what kind of effect you can expect. Because once you start stacking stuff together, some drugs might be heightened or blunted to a certain extent. And then the last thing you want is, I took compound XYZ and it didn't work for me. Oh, maybe it's because you took another compound at the same time that blunted the effect. And I don't see anybody else do that in their YouTube videos. They might do it during consultations, I don't know. But it's, the polypharmacy is still poorly investigated. And even when you go to PubMed or any other publication website, these drugs are investigated solo, not in combination. Maybe metformin and pioglitazone, diabetic medications, for example. That's studied in combination. But steroids, anabolic steroids, fat burners, no, we have to do it ourselves,
And the fact of the matter is, those studies will never be done. So it really is on us to dive into it ourselves. Exactly. It would be awesome, but it's unethical.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, let's dive back a little bit, because one of the things I love to do with this podcast is to not only give people different thought processes and different approaches to things, I like to give them actionables. Now, not necessarily an actionable in the sense of go buy this PED, it's awesome, but I do like to give some examples. And you just brought up Mirabegron, which is an amazing medication, and it's something that you recently did a deep dive in. Can you explain to me, how is this drug different than Clenbuterol, and how is it possibly better? How can we leverage it instead?
Right. So Clenbuterol, everybody in the bodybuilding space has probably tried or heard about. It works on the beta-2 adrenergic receptors, and there might be some spillover into the beta-3 adrenergic receptors where additional fat loss occurs. And that, if I remember correctly, I think that's from 80 micrograms onwards in normal, healthy individuals, but that might be 100 micrograms, 120 micrograms if you're a huge muscular bodybuilder with, more beta-2 adrenergic receptors on skeletal muscle, central nervous system, and adipose tissue. Right, as you get bigger, you get more of these receptors, so the spillover dose might be higher than general population. So it's long been speculated that some of the fat-burning effects of Clenbuterol don't only come from the beta-2 receptors, but also the beta-3 receptors, which are found in adipose tissue and the bladder. So if you activate the beta-3 adrenergic receptors in the bladder, they relax, they dilate, and now you can hold more urine. And there's a medication for nighttime, what is it called? Not incontinence, just to kind of prevent you from peeing too much at night. Mirabegron, barometric. And this has been prescribed for a very long time. And as a side effect is weight loss. Now, the clinical dosages of Mirabegron are 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams. But if you ramp up the dose a little bit more, you space it out 3 times per day. It has a very long half-life of 52 hours, so it's even longer than Clenbuterol. So if you space it out 2 or 3 times per day, you go to 100 milligrams, 150, maybe 200. Right? For the guys that really like fat loss, you get fat loss through the beta-3 adrenergic receptors without this beta-2 stimulation on the heart, where your heart rate is just perpetually elevated. And then, of course, you don't only take Clen, but you also take Yohimbine and T3 or other fat burners that work on the heart. So, Dean talked about this years ago, and then some of my audience members talked about this. And I just contacted the pharmacy here, said, hey, do you have Mirabegron available? And said, yes. So did some research, ordered it, gave it a try, did more research as I was trying it. And I realized this is basically a side effect-free fat burner that prevents nighttime urination or reduces it. So instead of going out to pee 3 times, you go out once, which you have the same urine volume. So that means you pee longer. So you're definitely going to wake up that time because you sit there just peeing like Austin Powers in the first Austin Powers movie after he gets the thought. Evacuation. So you're just sitting there peeing like up a storm. And then, of course, you wake up, but you wake up less often. And then as a side effect of this drug, you get fat loss over time. Now, of course, I'm crazy. And we know that we have a beta-2 and beta-3 adrenergic receptor to leverage. So I combined both albuterol and Mirabegron, which albuterol also works on the beta-2 receptor, or Clenbuterol and Mirabegron. And I came to the conclusion that a low dose of each is probably the best fat burner stack you can use if you want to get fat loss through the beta-2 and 3 adrenergic receptors. So you take either 2 milligrams albuterol or 20 micrograms Clenbuterol, like the lowest dose you notice where you get fat loss, but the heart rate, the palpitations are not so debilitating that you do a set of heavy squats and you have to lay on the floor with your legs up because your heart rate is so high. So that's basically the lowest dose where you get some fat loss, but it doesn't debilitate your workout. And then you leverage the Mirabegron on the side, and then you get a synergistic effect on the fat loss. And almost side effect free. The problem is Mirabegron is expensive. It's like $50 a bottle.
Would you recommend, well, if it's like anything else, once you start recommending it, everybody's going to dive on board and try to supply it. So we've seen that happen in a couple of the other worlds that we'll talk about shortly. Mm-hmm. But just finishing up on the topic of this one in particular, if we're going for that polypharmacy approach to hit all these receptors, do you recommend maybe starting with an albuterol in combination as opposed to Clen because of the shorter half-life to assess it? Or would you jump right to Clen if somebody's experienced with Clenbuterol?
Yeah, it depends on what you prefer. Like I prefer albuterol over Clenbuterol because I just get terrible palpitations. But sometimes the albuterol is not as effective, even if you ramp up the dose. Clenbuterol is one of the most effective fat burners out there, besides DNP maybe. Clen always works, especially if you ramp up the dose. So it really depends on how much time you have and what other fat burners you're using. Are you using growth hormone, AOD, HGH frag, and SLU, PP332, and all those mitochondrial aids? So if you have 2 fat burners to choose from, I would maybe start with albuterol and Mirabegron. If you have experience with albuterol, you could start with a combination. But if you don't have experience with either, you start with Mirabegron first, get some experience with that, the side effect, almost free drug. See how much fat loss you get out of that, ramp up the dose as needed, and then throw in a low dose of albuterol, ramp up that dose until it no longer works. And then you switch it for Clen.
Awesome. I think that's a great approach to take.
Yeah, just start somewhere, slowly build it up, see how you respond. And I wish so badly that we could give cookie cutter approaches and blanket dosages, but you just can't. You just, unfortunately. And sometimes the low dose works and sometimes it doesn't. And then it means that you just need to take more or the product that you're using is not dosed as it should be, which happens.
Right. So it is important to be confident in your sources and just to kind of take it with a grain of salt as time goes on too, because we're not necessarily getting all of these prescribed by our primary care physician, and we can't really assume that everything's dosed as is. But I'm very excited. So I highly recommend anybody watching this jump over and check out your deep dive video on Mirabegron. It's one of those drugs that it has so much potential upside. I've actually got a package of it sitting right next to me that I've been excited to utilize because I personally am super sensitive to stimulants, and just a little bit of Clen just makes me feel like crap. I can manage albuterol a little bit better, but I feel like this one, since I saw your initial video on it, and I don't understand why people don't give credit where it's due. I had no idea this existed till I saw your video, and that is the reason I purchased it.
I heard it from Dean and one of my audience members. So I get plenty of recommendations myself. Hey, Steve, have you heard about this? I heard about that. Then my question is always, is it available? Like I heard about trevogrumab and garetosmab. Mike Israel made a very video about that, about the scientific evidence, and it looks so promising. And then you look into it, you can't get it anywhere. And if you can't get it, it costs like 1.5 million. So what's the fucking point? Yeah, what's the point at this point, right? Okay, it looks promising, great. But SARMs also looked promising. So if you can't get it and you can't run the experiment, and then it's just useless to waste your time on it. But yeah, Mirabegron is available, and some of the sources carry it.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's going to get more and more popular. Yeah. So as it becomes more talked about, people will want to supply it more because people will want to make money. So definitely something to keep an eye out for. Let's kind of segue, still staying within the fat loss kind of realm here, to something else that, we got to give you credit for kind of putting on the map or popularizing. And that is the world of the mitochondrial support drugs, peptides, supplements. And there's so much we can dive into with this one, but let me know, what was it that first got you into looking into the mitochondrial world in terms of performance and fat loss? And if somebody hasn't dabbled yet, where do you recommend they start, and how do we build up that kind of synergy?
Yeah, so I looked into this thing maybe 5 years ago when I was still coaching bodybuilders, and of course, or 7 years ago, when they were subject to drug testing. And then there's a lot of stuff you can't use. So fat burners like Clenbuterol have a pretty long detection time. And then yohimbine or Wolsine you can use because they're not on the doping list. But that doesn't really get the job done. And you notice a lot of guys, they start losing energy, but you can't really use anything stimulatory because it's all on the doping list. So you find out about MOD-C and NAD+, and nicotinamide mononucleotide and antioxidants to help with reducing oxidative stress when you upregulate the mitochondria. So I really started looking into it then. And then maybe 3 years ago, I released a mitochondrial deep dive about what I was doing. But since then, a lot of new compounds have come to the market. So I've been changing my mitochondrial stack quite a bit. And then Dean, who we also had on the podcast, I believe, he came up with the SLU, PP332, methylene blue, and MOD-C stack. And then, I made deep dives on all three of these compounds to really look into it. Because the scientific evidence for SLU PP332 is kind of funky. It shows to be like it's an exercise mimetic. So even if you don't do anything, it gives you a sensation of exercise in the animal models. But that's in a milligram dose, not a microgram dose, if you extrapolate that. Now, all these sources, they give 100 micrograms, 250 micrograms. So you need to ramp up the dose maybe a little bit higher than as expected, or you can create synergy with SLU, MOD-C, methylene blue, and maybe SS31 or ubiquinol, PQQ, pyrroloquinoline, quinone, all upregulates mitochondrial function. So in that deep dive that I made, I basically gave like 3 stacks: a cheap stack, a medium stack, and then all you can spend money mitochondrial buffet protocol, right? So you go from $200 a month to $2,000 a month. Of course, the $2,000 per month protocol works a lot better. Then you literally have unlimited energy. It doesn't matter, if you're fasting or you're doing 2 hours of cardio or that kind of stuff. And that slowly trickled down through the fitness industry. And then as it's trickling down, you get a little bit of notoriety. Like, hey, Steve introduced the stack. And then Dean introduced the stack on top of, what Steve introduced. And now we basically got, this very popular stack of SLU, PP332, MOD-C, and methylene blue at lower dosages that seems to offer a world of change for most people. Many Olympian is running it, albeit that they're not talking about it. But are they in Classic 212 or Open? And even I think some men's physiques guys, I mean, we see these guys in our inbox all the time. But it's good to see that, it's working for people, that they keep their mitochondria healthy and fresh and functional and their oxidative stress low. So they turn out to be healthier and way more productive, even towards the end of a contest prep. And even during the off season, where just have more energy levels, not be chronically fatigued from the high body weight and the growth hormone usage and the insulin and all the food. So all these little things we're leveraging, and the quality of life of people has improved substantially. Whereas before we were just all miserable bodybuilders, but it doesn't have to be the case, which kind of sucks because that means you have to leverage more drugs.
But on the plus side, drugs can be awesome if you know what you're doing. So it just gives us more stuff to deep dive into and learn about. Now, if we're beginning this mitochondrial journey, do you recommend starting slow with basics like a CoQ10, ubiquinol, a PQQ? And then from where do we go from there? If we want to add one thing at a time or add a small amount of the different PEDs or peptides, do you think a MOT-C is a little bit more all-encompassing? Do you like to jump right into SLU? Do you like to jump right into the combo? Or do we start with a methylene blue by itself?
I would start with methylene blue because it's an oral. You don't have to inject it. And again, we already do plenty of injections as we do, whether you're on TRT or there above. And methylene blue is easy to source. It's everywhere. It's on Amazon. It's on eBay. It's, the affiliates that we represent, they all have methylene blue capsules, 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams. And I would start there, 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams. The problem is with methylene blue is that it's investigated in malaria and all kinds of diseases, propriism, when you're having continuous erection from taking too much Viagra, and they literally inject like 50 milligrams of methylene blue to kill the nitric oxide synthase, and then the arteries kind of relax and you can let go of the blood. So the funny thing is, if you do research on methylene blue, you find all these deleterious, terrible side effects, which are all established at higher dosages. So I made a methylene blue deep dive, 50 minutes or something, and I'm working on a second part because there's a lot more to discuss. So this is one of those compounds that you need to respect. You do the research and it looks like a terrible drug, or great if you have a particular medical condition, and then you try to find research on low dosages, and it's not there.
Nope, nothing.
No, just a little bit about antidepressive effects through MAOI inhibition and increasing serotonin, dopamine, and epinephrine levels in the brain, which again can be risky if you're already on an SSRI or an SNDRI or something like that to help with your mood. And then there's also scientific evidence which shows that at clinical dosages of 50 milligrams to 200 milligrams per day, intramuscular or sub-Q or sub-Q or intravenous, I think those, what was it? Now, oral and intravenous, oral and intravenous dosages up to 200 milligrams per day, that serotonin syndrome can occur. But if you take a low dose of an SSRI and a low dose of methylene blue, most people are okay. They have no serotonin syndrome, no side effects. So the problem is sometimes when you do research on these drugs, the dosage range that we're after for biohacking, not investigated. Same with SLU-PP332. It's all higher dosages. But the lower dosages are not recommended. If at higher dosages it shows that there's no deleterious effects, you can kind of assume that there's no negative effects on lower dosages. And with methylene blue, we see at higher dosages all kinds of negative side effects, but we don't know if it's safe at lower dosages. So, we're basically a gigantic sample size of using this and seeing if it's safe. But, methylene blue has made it a little bit of a comeback or has become popular since the pandemic. And it seems that at lower dosages, it's quite sustainable. And that would be my first recommendation after the ubiquinol and the PQQ and, NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide or nicotinamide riboside to increase your NAD plus levels. That really helps with energy levels and just overall metabolism because 25,000 processes are dependent on NAD plus. And they might as well go on magnesium supplements because 300 processes are dependent on magnesium. Helps with artery dilation, contractions, and overall health. So if you optimize that little ground foundation, low oxidative stress, and optimizing your mitochondria, and then you go to the next step, which is maybe methylene blue, I think that's a good step. But without the foundation, methylene blue is not going to do anything because your mitochondria are still, the biogenesis isn't there. You don't feed them the nutrients. So it's a step-by-step process. So you start low, build your way up, what I always like to say. you start at this foundation level. You take the supplements, you get yourself healthy, you unfuck yourself from an unhealthy perspective. You eat healthy, you do the cardio, you do the activity, which increases mitochondrial biogenesis. And then you supplement the methylene blue on top, and you should notice a difference at 5 to 10 milligrams per day. Now, you can either leverage that to 25 milligrams per day, and then you might get some, hematocrit changes, or you add in, I would say, the SLU. It's also tablets. Easy. It's an exercise mimetic, helps with energy levels, helps with fat loss. It's easier to take. It's easier to source. And then the step above that would be MOD-C, maybe 1 milligram, half a milligram per day. And then a step above that would be SS31. So, and then a step above that would be IV NAD+, right? So you basically go up as the administration route gets more cumbersome and the cost of each compound becomes more expensive. And yes, you can do nicotinamide mononucleotide and nicotinamide riboside supplementation, or B100 complex if you so desire, to increase your NAD+ levels. But if you want a little bit more, you might need to go with sub-Q NAD+ or IV NAD+, and that costs more. So the cost is usually the limiting factor. And you go through the step-by-step process. Like, okay, man, my sweet spot, I'm spending $200 per month on this stack, and I'm happy. Good.
Now, swinging back a little bit, you've done quite a few deep dives into 5-amino-1-MQ, and I bring that up specifically because you brought up NAD. So these two things work very synergetically. 5-amino-1-MQ blocking an enzyme that basically limits the process through which NAD goes. What are your thoughts on that overall? Because I find it polarizing. Some people swear by it and get an incredibly strong effect from it. Some people notice next to nothing. Why do you think that is? And what's your personal thoughts on it now, having run it a few times?
I think it's individual response. It's the same as some people get hair loss from asteron and some don't. Some people respond very well to growth hormone and some don't. Same as testosterone. You have those non-responders. So, and again, sourcing issues. So let's say we have one source and 10 people run it, then maybe 9 out of 10 gets a result and one person doesn't due to individual response. But if we run 10 sources on 10 different people, maybe it's half-half, because half the sources are, there's a reason why I don't represent all the sources, only the ones that I trusted. So, and it's not a cheap compound to source, like Clenbuterol or ITPP, or some of these compounds are kind of expensive to source. And it could be a bioavailability issue. Now, even though 5-amino-1-MQ has the highest oral bioavailability of all the N-methyltransferase inhibitors, there's about 7 of them, and 5-amino-1-MQ has the most oral bioavailability, where it ends up in the adipose tissue, inhibiting the N and MT enzymes and keeping NAD+ levels in adipose tissue going. But if you inject it at 10 milligrams 3 times per day, it's obviously more potent than taking orally 50 milligrams 3 times per day. So that will be another route that you can look into. I have injectable 5-amino-1-MQ laying around here, but I haven't tried it yet. I'm not at that point. Because I feel that, when I did those 3 videos on 5-amino-1-MQ, there was not so much information. Nobody tried it. I was the first one. There was no interest because nobody heard about it. Now people are using it. And now with some more anecdotal experience and doing some more research, I realized that 5-amino-1-MQ works the best if you only take it, due to the cost, from 6% body fat onwards.
So it's kind of like a finishing touch.
It's a finishing touch, yeah. Exactly. So you see a lot of guys, they can't really get in shape beyond 6%, right? It's difficult. The skin is thick. They get flat, but the skin doesn't get any leaner. They're not getting any more shredded. So that's an N-methyltransferase problem, where the N-methyltransferase breaks down all the NAD+. There's no energy in adipose tissue. And now the metabolism of adipose tissue is no longer functioning. So it means that whether you metabolize adipose tissue inside of adipose tissue for energy production, for ATP in the mitochondria, which is in adipose tissue, or you help liberate it from adipose tissue, that both of those processes are kind of non-functional. Body temperature goes down and the fat release goes away, and thus people get flat because there's no more fat to burn. It doesn't get released. Doesn't matter how much Clen or GH, hormone-sensitive lipase, you leverage. The adipose tissue is non-functional. And then you throw in a little bit of 5-amino-1-MQ, and this N-methyltransferase enzyme inhibition causes NAD plus levels to rise, especially if you combine it with nicotinamide mononucleotide or nicotinamide riboside, or IV NAD plus or sub-Q NAD plus. And then suddenly from 6% body fat to 4% onwards is a breeze.
Have you done any reading or research into additional ways to direct the NAD in conjunction with the 5-amino-1-MQ, like an apigenin or any other ways to kind of leverage this NAD as we're building it in our system?
So apigenin and epicatogen, it sounds good on paper. But in practical applications, you got to go a little bit harder than those compounds. So from my experience, I feel that NMN, NAR, or NAD++ 5-amino-1-MQ when you're 6% body fat is just the way to go. But yeah, if you can get the results with 5-amino-1-MQ and epigenin, then by all means, I'm not against it. Just I don't find the scientific evidence compelling, and all the people that I talk to, it's just like, I ran it for one time. Same as epicatogen. I ran it for one time. My inflammatory markers went through the roof, and I'm like, I'm done.
Some things are just not worth it based on the side effects that can accumulate there as well.
Exactly. And I really wanted to like it by increasing follistatin levels. I got some decent results. And it's a low-hanging fruit, right? Because you can buy it on the supplement stores, and it's just processed from green tea, basically. Mm-hmm. So it would be nice to have some sort of herbal extract that actually works. And it did work to a certain extent. But in my case, my inflammatory markers went to like 21. So it's like cancer level. So it's like, okay. We tried it. I did the research. Here's a deep dive. You figure it out if you want to run it.
Yep. On to the next one. Now with SLU becoming so popular since your initial videos, and now we're seeing more and more just anecdotal reports based on pro bodybuilders using it, amateur bodybuilders, regular people trying to get leaner, people trying to leverage some more fat loss in an off-season setting. Has your opinion on that changed at all, or has your potential thought process and how you approach it changed? Like, how much can we do? How long can we do it? When do we need to come off of it? Because it's hard to tell on something that's not giving us very notable side effects.
There's 8 studies. So you can't say how long and when do you need to stop in the dose, because the dosage recommendations are far lower. They're based on anecdotal reports than what the scientific evidence is. The scientific evidence for an exercise mimetic effect says multiple milligrams. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I get shitted on because they say, well, in the studies, it says you need to run 12 milligrams. So I ran 12 milligrams. And then 5 days later, like, Steve, I'm on fire. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going on. So well, this is why I recommended the low dose. slow down. You could, take it easy. So you don't always have to go with the scientific evidence. Like Anadrol, for example, that's prescribed at 1 milligram per kilogram of body weight, or 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So if you weigh 100 kilos, 225 pounds, that's 500 milligrams of Anadrol. Who's going to do that? Come on now. So with SLU, I did the research. I'm not sure if there's a new study since then. I think there's about 8 studies. 2 of them are in animal models, a couple in vitro studies, and then one study comparing SLU PP332 to another number, which was shown to be more beneficial regarding kidney benefits, where the mitochondria in the kidneys are upregulated, and then you have a kidney protective effect. SS31 was shown to have some sort of similar kidney protective effect. And I've run both of them, and my kidney parameters did not budge at all. So maybe they're functioning correctly, or maybe I just still produce too much creatinine. I mean, all this muscle, what do you expect? all this creatine, damn it. So with the SLU, it's very hard to tell. And I know people that, like Dean, has been running it year round at 500 micrograms to 750 micrograms. I know guys that ran a gram, 2 grams for 6 months straight. No side effects. Now, long-term side effects, we don't know.
So because the data's not there.
The data's not there. It's again, 2 animal models, 2 in vitro studies, and then some relative binding affinity. And so you can't do much with that. So we're our own guinea pigs. I stopped taking it for 6 months for the epicatogen experiments and the follistatin experiments, and I'm going to reintroduce it next week, because then I'm done with the Ngenla experiment. Because people always complain that I take too much polypharmacy and I don't know what's doing what. and I'm sick of it. I want my polypharmacy back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's tempting to try and isolate things, but at the same token, we're trying to get some results here, and we want to see how these things work together because so many of them are just so synergistic at the same time. Now, you mentioned SS31. There's a lot of confusion on that one. Now, mechanistically, that's working to increase the integrity of the cell itself. It's basically making the cell stronger. But in your experience, what do you notice taking it, and how do you leverage it best for what it does?
So this one I haven't made a deep dive on yet because the first time I took SS31, I took 5 milligrams per day during the mitochondrial support stack, the $2,000 mitochondrial support stack with NAD plus IV and then the whole shebang, and I didn't notice anything. So I kind of wrote it off. I didn't do the research because I do preliminary research. I run it. If it does something, I'll do the full Monty. Right? I'll read everything and summarize it and make a deep dive. But if it doesn't do anything, then I set it and forget it, basically.
Right.
So now I'm experimenting with it again in combination with ModC, different source, one of my affiliates. I did 5 milligrams, too much. 2.5 milligrams, that was something. Now, from what I remember, so you're stumping me here a little bit. From what I remember, it helps with mitochondrial biogenesis and energy levels, ATP synthesis, and that's similarly to what ModC does. But ModC is a mitochondrial peptide that the mitochondria produce to signal the surrounding tissues for energy that the mitochondria can feed on. And then with the rest of the mitochondrial support stack, the antioxidants and the electron donors, basically, ATP synthesis is significantly heightened, and then SS31 is basically the cherry on top. So that's how far I got. And in this stack, I really like this. So I will make a deep dive on it and then release an updated version of the mitochondrial support stack. But I have not done so much research on SS31.
That one's tough. And then on top of it, too, it's actually pretty damn expensive. So it's going to be one to definitely leverage in kind of the higher end stacks of it. I kept buying these 50 milligram vials, like 1 or 2 at a time. I'd order some stuff. I'd be like, oh, let me grab 1 or 2 of these. So I've slowly been collecting it to do a deep dive into it myself and use it. But it's been like 6 months of ordering it every couple weeks and just throwing some extra cash at it. So we'll launch that forward pretty soon. But it's a very intriguing compound.
What I noticed so far is that with ModC, the energy, like the significant boost of energy, it starts to wear off after about 4 or 5 hours. So it acts a little bit as a pick-me-up, especially if you're dieting. So what I've been doing is either 1 milligram ModC in the afternoon and then 2.5 milligrams SS31 later in the day. It almost feels the same. Or half a milligram ModC and like 1.25 milligrams SS31 twice per day. So once in the morning before fasted cardio and then once in the evening before the workout. Oh, man. That second shot before the workout. Oh, my God. Ooh, that's some serious shit during the workout. That's, just racking plates and just running around like it's a time for another set. Yeah, fuck it, let's go.
And I think that's the best thing about taking the approach of like adding a few things at a time and then being open to modulating the dosage a little bit. Because like you just said, 5 milligrams is what's recommended in a lot of the writing that's out there right now. But you just said it yourself, 5 milligrams is way too much because you have to take into consideration you're leveraging several different things that all have similar purposes. So on one hand, hell, it's going to save us a couple bucks because we're not taking a mega dose the entire time. But on the other hand, we do have to realize that sometimes less is more with a lot of these things as well, because there's so many different cards to play.
We create synergy, right? And if you're on all these supplements and then methylene blue and SLU and ModC and SS31, you should be able to get more out of one. I mean, are we going to use like 2 grams a test and then 2 grams of Primo? Or do we do 1 gram a test and 1 gram of Primo and then draw the line there? Right? Mm-hmm. I talked with, I could say this. I talked with Nick Walker offline a little bit about these peptides. He said, what happens when you take these pre-workout? And like, I didn't even think about that. Let's give that a try. So that's where the idea came from. Because I would always take these peptides in the morning, to get the day started, basically. And then I had long-lasting energy. And then 5-6 hours later, you're like, it starts to diminish a little bit. Maybe I should split it up. It's a reasonably short half-life, especially after the ModC deep dive. I realized that it stays upregulated for a couple of hours and then it's gone. You have a long-lasting effect, but that initial spike of unlimited energy in this mitochondrial stack, that only lasts for a couple of hours. So, after talking with Nick and then realizing the half-life was so short, and then making the stack together, it's like, okay, let's do it twice per day, and even half the dose. Man, it's bliss.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, you're upregulating the production of ATP, which if you do immediately pre-workout, that's literally going to give you more energy for your workout. How does that compare to things like injectable ATP, injectable AMP, your injectable pre-workout world? Like, what experience do you have with those? I know you've done a few deep dives into that world as well. What type of injectable pre-workouts outside the mitochondrial realm do you like to leverage? Because we have the ATPs, the AMPs, the injectable carnitines, the ITPPs. What do you think some of the most effective ones are just for a gnarly workout than maybe specifically for fat loss, building muscle, etc.?
I rest in peace, Anabolics Anonymous. They had the best pre-workouts ever, man. They had the best pre-workouts ever. Super Shredder and Stampede, my favorite. I had videos on them, reviewing them. And unfortunately, my, with YouTube and stuff, creator peptide websites, I was very scared that they were going to shut my channel down. So I took those videos off. But they were really ahead of the game regarding injectable pre-workout. So AMP is a very potent vasodilator, adenosine monophosphate. And of course, the precursor for ATP, but ATP can also convert into AMP in the bloodstream. And then ATP is the raw energy. Now, if you inject these, you get energy and vasodilation at the same time. So not only do you deliver the raw energy, which in certain instances the ATP can permeate into the cell, and you inject it extracellularly, right? Well, let's say you train chest, you inject the injectable pre-workouts, 1 cc, half cc, bilaterally, left and right chest muscle. Some of this ATP can enter the cell and deliver the energy there. Or it gets converted into AMP, and then in a pre-workout combination of AMP and ATP, you have this initial AMP that causes vasodilation, so you get a crazy pump, right? Over-the-counter pre-workouts with L-citrulline and betaine hydrochloride and beetroot extract, that's cute. It's very, very vanilla. It works. But injectable pre-workout, what is it, Synth? Well, let's not mention the name, but the old school one that had like 40 milligrams AMP vials. Right? And then you inject the whole thing pre-contest, the whole 10 milliliters. So you could use that as a pre-workout as well. And you just do 1 cc, you get 40 milligrams AMP, and then the vasodilation just gives you like an insane pump. Then especially if you start stacking that with intra-workout nutrition, insulin or IGF-1, it's bliss of anabolism, basically. Now, how much of actual muscle mass you gain from that, I'm not entirely sure, but it makes your workout so much fun. Where you're just pumped beyond belief, and your chest would literally stick out, and people would look at you like, you came in looking like this, and now you look like that. What the hell? What are you doing? So,
Now, AMP itself is a really potent activator of AMPK. So by taking something like an injectable AMP, can you leverage a greater AMPK response and then justify it as like a fat loss agent too, or is that negligible?
Yeah, but I think ICAR is way more potent in that sense.
What is your experience with ICAR? Because I've read a lot about it, but I haven't used it yet.
Not much. One of my affiliates is working on it. So I used it in the past, injectable, and then it gave me good fat loss, but I didn't have enough to really finish out an entire dieting phase with ICAR. But it gives you very good energy, more than cardarine does through the PPAR.
What are your thoughts on injectable L-carnitine? Speaking of the injectable fat-burning agents, do you leverage that a lot? Do you like it?
I run it year-round, 2 servings per day, 500 milligrams per day. But it mostly helps me with cognitive benefits. So you can say that it upregulates androgen receptors. The problem is those studies, when you read them, those people are also training, and training also upregulates the androgen receptor. So what is doing what? Can it hurt? Probably not. So just take your L-carnitine and enjoy the ride. It helps with fatty acids transportation, so not mobilization, mobilization, but not release from adipose tissue. So whatever fat is in the bloodstream, it helps to absorb it into the mitochondria. And then if you're fat adapted or fat optimized, then you burn fat more effectively.
So essentially, you have to stimulate it, but then once the fat's broken down to the bloodstream, it'll shuttle it into the mitochondria faster.
So basically, you can consider carnitine like a magnesium, Magnesium is good for muscular contractions, just like calcium. You need those electrolytes for muscular contraction. And you need carnitine for fatty acid oxidation to occur optimally in the mitochondria. It's not necessary, but it occurs optimally. So if you undergo a lot of fat loss or fat burning, you take Clen and cardarine and XYZ, and you have a lot of this fatty acid mobilization into the mitochondria for oxidation, Krebs cycle stuff, beta oxidation. If your carnitine stores deplete, then fatty acid metabolism is not optimized anymore. So you supplement with carnitine because you go from 100% fatty acid oxidation to 200%, by example, by taking Mirabegron, albuterol, and cardarine. But your production of carnitine is 100%. So you're literally depleting yourself. So you supplement to match this fatty acid oxidation, and then fatty acid oxidation is optimized. And what I also notice is that with injectable carnitine, it gives you a little bit of nootropic benefit, similar to acetyl L-carnitine, but way more pronounced, when you're in a ketogenic diet. And I always follow a ketogenic diet, so I'm completely fat adapted. I'm always in ketosis, and I feel that the carnitine helps quite significantly with that as well. It's like carnitine and coffee together in the morning. Oh, man.
What are your thoughts on injectable choline with that? Have you experimented with that?
Yeah.
Do you like choline with the carnitine?
Injectable choline and acetylmethionine, that helps more with fatty acid mobilization than the carnitine does, because that also helps with the liberation of adipose tissue. The carnitine just purely goes into the mitochondria. So choline and acetylmethionine, or what is it? Methionine and acetyl and choline injections, maybe 100 milligrams each, with 500 milligrams carnitine. That stack, it's great for fat loss. It just keeps going until it stalls based on a nicotinamide N-methyltransferase inhibitor or N-methyltransferase inhibitor. And then you add 5-amino-1-Q with that, and then it's just basically continuous.
Perfect synergy and very low side effects in general from those as well, if any.
Yeah, post-injection pain, obviously, but it's manageable.
That's the world we live in. Exactly. Speaking of more injections based on that, what about some of the other ones that might not be as good for fat loss but will drive the workout? Like, I'm going to butcher this, but diphenylpropylene dichloroacetate or DADA, or maybe getting into the others.
Oh, DADA, yeah. I know, it's a very long name.
I was close. I wasn't there, but I was close.
I keep messing it up. So DADA. Daddy.
Yeah.
The daddy drug. So it helps with ATP recycling. Mm-hmm. And that creates basically unlimited energy, especially if you combine it with injectable pre-workout or things that upregulate the mitochondria. What I'm not sure about, I haven't done a deep dive on this, but what I suspect is that by recycling the ATP, you're not producing new ATP, and that means that fatty acid oxidation is maybe blunted because there's no need to oxidize more fatty acids because ATP is just turnover, ATP, AMP, and vice versa, basically. So you have this continuous calorie production or energy production, and that's great for like bringing up weaker body parts. So if you need to do a high volume leg day, for example, 50 to 100 milligrams DADA, that's kind of the top end, it makes a world of difference, man.
Right. Your training just basically goes to another level, but potentially at the expense of that fat oxidation. Exactly. I had a similar hang up with using Mildronate because I read about that on paper initially as, oh my God, this is awesome. The workouts will be gnarly, but it's actually working by inhibiting that usage of the L-carnitine. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to take these two things together, but there's always that little bit of a trade-off. Right. What are some other injectables as far as injectable pre-workouts or just injectable performance enhancers in the acute sense that we might not have talked about or people might not have heard of? What are some of your other favorites?
Man, there's so many. There's nootropics that people don't leverage for their workout. And it's something as simple as alpha GPC, just to really put you in the zone and help with that choline central nervous system stimulation. I mean, it's just such low-hanging fruit, or agmatine, or whatever you prefer, man. I mean, I recently made a deep dive about myoinositol trispyrophosphate, which helps with the oxygen affinity of the hemoglobin, allowing for more oxygen delivery. And nobody watched it because they never heard about it, which is fine. But you can basically hold your breath and do 20 reps of on the leg press or squats because the oxygen is just all there. Combine that with DADA, it's unlimited stamina.
Here's my question on that one, because I've wanted to do an experiment with it. I haven't had the time to really leverage it. So I'm on HRT, as most of us are. I don't really dabble in blasting anything much anymore just because I don't have much of a purpose to. I'll experiment here and there, maybe what's the term, athletic HRT. But situationally, I tend to run a little bit high, as most of us do, in hematocrit. Now, utilizing like an ITPP or a similar product, by being able to bind more oxygen to the red blood cells, does that downregulate the need to increase my amount of red blood cells to get oxygen places? Can I mitigate my hematocrit using a product like this?
I wish. I didn't see it in the scientific evidence, and I didn't see it anecdotally. So I recommended this to people with chronically high hematocrit, and it just stays elevated. But their endurance goes to absolutely phenomenal amount. Like ITPP in a combination with EPO, where you stay within the reference range, that's ideal, right? So you bring your hematocrit up to like 54, 55. When you're good hydrated, you're still 54. And then ITPP, it just has the maximum oxygenation of the hemoglobin. So you're just delivering oxygen like crazy and then removing the metabolic waste products, the CO2 as well. That's a really good combination. Especially a little bit of a vasodilation in place just to make sure that the delivery, there's no shearing inside the arteries from all of these red blood cells. But I haven't seen it modify hematocrit or red blood cell count at all. It just makes it more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Which is unfortunate because on paper it should be something that could lower that, but there's probably a lot of other things in play. What about using it in a recovery setting, like before bed at night to kind of reduce any sort of hypoxia overnight or anything like that?
So this attaches to your hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is found in red blood cells, and red blood cells have a 90 to 110-day active life, give or take, maybe 120 even. So you take it, and the effects are long-lasting. So it takes a while to build up. You have this build-up phase of taking maybe 100 milligrams to 250 milligrams per day for 2 weeks, and then at one point you feel that you're never out of breath anymore. And then you drop it down to 100 milligrams to 250 milligrams 3 times a week. Or 4 times a week, depending on your blood volume. So it's not something that works acutely. It needs to build up. And then it has, you stop taking it, and the effects of oxygenation linger for about 12 days. And it sounds very, very good. The only real downside of ITPP is that it reduces vascular endothelial growth factor and limits angiogenesis, which has anti-cancer benefits, which is great. But if you want some sort of hypoxia in weaker body parts, let's say you're trying to bring up your chest, you really try to send some sort of hypoxia response to increase vascular endothelial growth factor, you produce more blood vessels through angiogenesis, and thus you can deliver more nutrients, more amino acids, more carbs, more fats, more drugs. If you take ITPP, you lose some of that signal. And then in the long term, I wonder if weaker body parts actually get weaker, because you miss out on this angiogenesis. And especially with legs, that's so dependent on good vascularity. That's what I'm wondering. So this is the only way. And if you do a recovery protocol with TB500 or BBC157 or cerebrolysine even, which also increases vascular endothelial growth factor, if you do a recovery protocol with those compounds, I would not take ITPP, and then you have this lingering effect of 11 to 12 days where angiogenesis, vascular endothelial growth factor might be suppressed.
Right. I was going to say, because you're upregulating and downregulating it simultaneously with all those compounds, so you're kind of left somewhere in the middle waiting for one to overpower the other.
Yeah, I suspect the same for hypoxia, hypoxin, one of those mildronate, amoxapine, bemetyl, class of drugs that you just inhibit vascular endothelial growth factor. In the short term, it might be very beneficial to prevent symptoms of hypoxia during a race. But in the long term, it's probably best not to take that for continuous points in time, because you need the VEGF for recovery.
Exactly. Now, changing gears a little bit into more of the muscle building world, because this is a question that I tend to get every single day. Somebody's asking me, what's the best peptide for building muscle? And every single time I end up giving a lecture on just how to increase performance and performance over time and a caloric surplus for gaining muscle, et cetera, because outside of the tried and true as far as anabolics, as far as growth hormone, as far as insulin and leveraging the synergy between the three, I don't know if we've found anything new or emerging in the last couple of years that's all of a sudden going to build muscle. So what are some things, maybe it's in that myostatin inhibition world, but what are some things that you see as promising that might be a little bit outside the box as far as things that can increase or improve hypertrophy?
Nothing really. Otherwise, I would have sourced it and made a deep dive on it. The only thing that I found was Increlex, recombinant IGF-1. That made a big difference in my recovery. Did it really put copious amounts of muscle on me? No, but I'm not a pro bodybuilder that lives like a pro bodybuilder life. I've seen pro bodybuilders use it, and it's a big difference. 500 micrograms to 1 milligram per day, it makes a huge difference. So not these weird dosages where they say 25 micrograms to 200 micrograms. Now you need to increase it quite a bit. I mean, the clinical dose is up to 0.12 milligrams per kilogram of body weight just to bring IGF-1 levels up a little bit in children from stunted growth. So that means if you're 100 kilos, that's 4 to 12 milligrams per day. I accidentally a whole vial of Increlex.
Well, I mean, that's going to be a different world no matter what. Now, Increlex is obviously king of that world. Is there any beneficial use to things like your trusted research chemical IGF-LR3 or DES or your PEG MGFs, or are these just so small or insignificant?
Like if you run IGF-1 in a vial per day, 1 milligram per day, I think it does something. It obviously gives you great pumps. Obviously helps with recovery. Doesn't really make you as lethargic and as GH. I think if you can afford that, then by all means, go for it, By all means, go for it. But I think HCG will put more muscle on you by increasing testosterone levels than most of these peptides do. And that's pretty cheap. Trevogrumab, garetosmab, it looks very, very promising on paper. And there's a boatload of these monoclonal antibodies that block myostatin and make a difference in clinical settings. But we haven't tried it yet. And honestly, in the clinical settings, people are unhealthy. They're sarcopenic, right? They're losing muscle mass. Or they gain a little bit of muscle mass back. 7% muscle mass gains back. But it's not like I'm gaining 7% muscle mass on top of the 50, 60 kilos of muscle that I already have. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I mean, I ran the epicatogen experiment. Looked super promising by increasing follistatin levels and reducing myostatin, and you get copious amounts of muscle. I don't know. I think 5 milligrams of Anavar would have given me better results. I did oral YK-11, sublingual YK-11, and injectable YK-11. And then by the time we came to injectable YK-11, I was like, you know what? This is actually pretty cool. I get like a unique contraction in my muscle. I feel full and round, and I get super sore right away after, my workout. And it almost felt like Superdrol. And then I did my blood work, and my blood work was actually very acceptable. Liver enzymes barely budged. Lipids stayed pretty in range. And so of all the stuff that I've tried from an anabolic perspective, injectable YK-11, which is classified as a SARM, but it's just a steroidal compound. And this is limited scientific evidence that it increases follistatin levels. But it's just another steroid that's readily available now, and an injectable without an ester attached. So you inject it in the muscle that you're going to train or sub-Q on rest days. And that worked quite well. Right. DHT annotate is making the rounds now, and some people swear by that. Stenbolone is making a comeback, and then Ment was a fun experiment. DHB I never tried. Ment I would like to add in again, get a little bit leaner, and then maybe just do test Deca and Ment, and then run off-season compounds while trying to cut so my joints don't hurt.
Now, Ment is one of those where if you understand what's going on, you can definitely leverage it to be beneficial. You just need to understand it beyond the level of most people saying, oh, it's good for getting big. You need to know what's going on an estrogen level and everything like that as well. Now, I watched your video on the YK-11, and that one, I'm not going to lie, I was actually surprised that your results ended up being favorable because it's just been around for so long and it was disregarded for a while. Like everything, it's cyclical. It gets popular, it goes away, it comes back. Now, is that something, since it's widely available and it's also available in the oral and sublingual routes as well, is that something that for your recreational, intermediate to advanced level gym goer that wants to add something else and maybe not increase their total anabolic load, is that worth throwing in there in your opinion then? Because it's not that expensive either.
Yeah, it's not that expensive. And the injectable route, it barely budged my lipids or my liver enzymes for the results that I got. So I got this result, and I would expect blood work to be fucked, right? But I got this result of my blood work, which is favorable because if you go on Superdrol, your blood work is like this. your liver enzymes are like 250, and your HDL is like 2, and your LDL is 100 or 120, and then you're on ezetimibe, and citrus bergamot. So, and this time I was like, I'm full, I'm hard, I'm dense, I'm stronger. The before and after pictures looked kind of the same. Unfortunately, I just suck at taking before and after pictures. It's my fault. People in the gym gave me a lot of compliments, like, what the fuck is going on with you? It's like, it's the old Steve is back. I said, well, 600 tests and 30 milligrams injectable YK-11. I think I'm back, but not back as I was before. So I felt good results. Again, that unique contraction that I got in skeletal muscle came very close to anavar, but it's hard to describe, man. It's like your muscle just wants to grow and be anabolic, for better explanation. I ran follistatin 344 after that, and then that feeling is completely heightened, where you just feel like, oh, I got to go home and eat and rest now. Otherwise, I go hypoglycemic. I'm working on that deep dive now. I'm a little bit late.
That'll be good. That'll be really good.
It will be very disappointing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it will be very disappointing. Yeah.
Well, I didn't expect to be so caught off guard by the YK-11.
Yeah, I want my affiliate sales like everybody else, but I got to keep it real. It's not worth your money.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, somebody has to go out there and try it in the applications that we do. And honestly, it's like, that's what you've built a reputation on, and deservingly so, man, because you're doing such a service to everybody in the community by going out and doing these experiments that we might not have access to otherwise. Yeah. Before we wrap things up, though, I got to ask you, it's like, this is such a cliche question. It's almost cringy. What else is on the horizon? What do you have in mind? What do you want to look into? What's the next thing? It could be in fat loss, longevity, performance, building muscle. What should we keep an eye out for from you?
I don't know, honestly. I'm running, I'm close to finishing the Injectable experiment. Chase Irons already ran Injectable, the long-acting growth hormone, the somatrogen GLA, which is growth hormone within a beta-HCG subunit. And 10 IUs per day, or 6 milligrams Injectable per day. And I'm happy with the results, but is it something groundbreaking? Not really. The most groundbreaking things that I ran was MENT, YK-11, and Increlex.
MENT, YK-11, and Increlex. Very interesting. Oh, Increlex I would expect, but still, from MENT being a strong compound, and I'm still blown away by YK-11 being that favorable. Like, I got a bottle now because of that, so I ordered one the other day. I'm like, all right, let me put this away for later.
Just give it a try for like 2 weeks, and then do some blood work, and you see, like, for the gains that I'm getting, it's actually quite mild on my blood work, which is exactly what we want. That's what we want. You want phenomenal gains, and your lipids and your liver enzymes and your creatinine and your hematocrit, that all stays in range. Inflammatory markers, all nice. And it's supposedly easy to brew in MCT oil due to its chemical structure. It's quite lipophilic, apparently. So that it dissolves in oil. So that's what I was pleasantly surprised about. And then I ran MENT during my last off season, and I got up to like 122 kilos, 160 or 265 pounds. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, I was fat though. I was fat.
Still makes it still fun though. It's still fun.
Oh man, I was so strong. Holy moly, dude! You can just keep loading plates. That's the most I miss, because when I was 25, 30 years old, everything is max effort. I had 12 plates on the leg press and 4 plate squats and all this crazy shit, and that's what I missed the most. So I came very close to that. Full stack on the leg press or leg extension, with bands and all this crazy shit. So I had a good 4 months where I was just fucking raping and pillaging in the gym. And I was on test MENT, Anadrol, and YK-11, but I think the MENT made a big difference. Yeah, and how much the
I'm sure
7-alpha methylestradiol contributed, I'm not sure. So we'll run it again in the cutting phase, and then that cycle I felt very, very good on test deck, and I was also eating like 5,500 calories, so that helps.
Yeah, you're gonna feel great no matter what there.
Yeah, you feel great there. So what's on the horizon? I don't know. I do a lot of research. I really looked into these monoclonal antibodies. Maybe it will be promising when it gets released, and maybe it'll be a lot cheaper. Maybe it'll be like 5 manufacturers outbidding each other for the best price, and then we can get it through China. But until that moment comes, you can only wish. And again, I've been disappointed so many times with the SARMs, the non-steroidal SARMs. Like YK-11 is just a steroid. But the Ostrine, the LGD, that kind of stuff. I've never seen a freak get developed from those compounds. I don't think there's anything really that exciting new. Bioglutide looks promising. So that's the quadruple action GLP-1. So you have GLP-1, GIP, glucagon, and then IGF-1 agonism. That could be something. There's this new cagrilintide. So if you want, you could have like a 5-action GIP, GLP-1, glucagon, IGF-1, and then amylin for the maximum appetite suppression and then some sort of anabolic effect. But dude, even if you go to 8 IUs per day of growth hormone, your IGF-1 levels or Increlex at 1 microgram or 1 milligram per day, and your IGF-1 levels are like 600 nanograms per milliliter, you still need some fucking steroids in there before it works. Because I've met people that have a naturally high IGF-1 level of 600 nanograms per milliliter, and that they're not super big until they throw in the steroids.
Yep, then it's a whole other planet.
Then it's a whole other planet. Yeah, they go in TRT and they mutate, which is great to see. But naturally, they were a little bit bigger, a little bit leaner than average. But they're not like phenomenal super freaks. Again, it's a synergy between different compounds. The anabolic pathways, we have the androgen receptor, which there's 70 different genetic polymorphisms on it, and then we don't even know what happens at the translocation site. You have some anabolism to the estrogen receptor, the progesterone receptor, the growth hormone receptor, the sexual binding globulin to a certain extent, like increasing cyclic adenosine monophosphate acting as a cofactor. And then, what is it? IGF-1 insulin. That's pretty much it. So if you leverage all of those in enough amounts to really kickstart the anabolism and you go to the fucking gym and train, then good things will happen. And okay, so as of the last 20 years, who are the freaks now? Rubiel, Rami, Carlos Thomas Jr. Those are like the freaks where you're like these guys have so much muscle, it looks silly.
Right.
And I don't think they run any of these drugs.
No. At the end of the day, man, genetics and work ethic is a deadly combo that some of us just will never be able to beat. But we have other tools.
I got Rubiel's cycle in the mail, and I looked at it and I'm like, what? Yeah, dude, it's like literally designed in the 90s.
Oh, my God. As is the case more often than not.
Trimix all the way. I'm like, what the fuck is this garbage, So that guy would really benefit from watching my YouTube channel and learning about 5-amino-1-MQ and maybe reticulocyte and mitochondrial function, and then deposing that's his responsibility. But I could get a skin paper thing, or maybe you need to sign up with one of the really good coaches like AJ Sims or something. He got Mustafa Mohammed in really good shape, the Egyptian guy.
Oh, yeah.
So, but I don't think there's anything on the horizon. I think it's just enjoy the ride, take the drugs that work for you, that cause minimum side effects, and have fun with it, I think that's all there is to it.
More than ever, it's just learning how things work. That's the biggest thing. And that's why more people need to pay attention to information sources such as yourself. That's not just saying, hey, this is good, do it. We need to know why, because when we know why and we know how, then we have the ability to empower ourselves with the ability to add, hey, I'll add this. Hey, I'll add that. Hey, I'll add this. Because if we know what's going on beneath the hood, it just opens up this entire world of being able to use this synergy. And I think the overarching theme of everything that we've discussed today has been synergy. Right. Don't take one or two things in massive doses when it's just going to mess you up, when you can add a few more things on top of it. Because polypharmacy gets a bad name because people look at it like, you guys just want to take drugs. And maybe we do, all right? Guilty.
I do.
I enjoy drugs.
I'm going to admit to that 100%. These last 6 months that I've been doing like solo experiments have been the most boring parts of my PED journey. Test and ipicatogen for 4 weeks. All right, and I increased the dose. Test and YK-11. Okay, I changed the administration around. Test and follistatin. I was so lethargic and I went hypoglycemic that I needed to take a week off. And then I did it for 2 more weeks. I just started eating because fuck it, at least put this shit to work, And now I do the Ngenla. So the lethargy is slowly creeping up on me. And so now I'm like, you know what? I tried. I listened to the audience. I know exactly what did what, but polypharmacy is where it's at. A little bit of test, a little bit of GHTs or 19-ors on top, and then a full Monty mitochondrial support stack for energy levels, and maybe a little bit of appetite blunting effect so the food noise is away, and I can be super productive and make all these deep dives. Because the last month I've just been last 6 weeks with the follistatin and the Injectable, I've just been sleepy as fuck. Right. I don't want to sit down and work. It's been terrible.
And again, respect for doing it for the sake of your audience. But I think at the end of the day, people need to realize polypharmacy for the sake of polypharmacy, probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
Polypharmacy for the intended result of synergy, I guess, if I could actually say it clearly.
If it makes sense, then if you can justify it, right? And then, I can always justify my stacks because I know how it works.
I mean, if we wanted to, we could justify just about everything.
Exactly. But
at the end of the day, making informed decisions to get the result that you want is really the way to go. And the only way you can make an informed decision is learning how these things work. So, Steve, thank you so much, not only for your time today, but for everything that you do for the community. I'm not a blow smoke guy. I got no reason to kiss your ass. You've already done the podcast. But seriously, thank you so much for everything that you do, because it just gives us more information to pull from. For the few people watching this that might not already follow you, where do we find you on YouTube, Instagram, all platforms? Where do we absorb all this information?
Vigorous Steve. You'll find me on most of the platforms. I'm on YouTube, Instagram. I'm on these dodgy third-rate websites like Rumble and Dailymotion, and I just started uploading there because I got my YouTube channel deleted at one point. So those are all linked in my link tree, I think. And vigoroussteve.com. And just type, there's only one. So just type in Vigorous Steve in Google and you'll find all kinds of stuff about me. Some good, some bad. Most of it is good.
Perfect. Well, Steve, again, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, if you're not already watching, check out Steve's channels. We'll have everything linked in the show notes here. And until next time, this is the DDT Method Podcast.